about that how to test the employees, their KSAOs, which should be in relation with the TDRs, what type of tests are available, and how can we go for hiring the right person for the right job at the right time. Meanwhile, if you have any question, you can ask in the chat room. The first topic we need to talk about is that why careful selection is important. It says that the importance of selecting the right employees is obviously based upon organizational performance, always depends in part on subordinates having the right skills and attributes. So the performance of an organization, as I told you earlier, that when we use the word performance, it would mean three things: productivity, profitability, and satisfaction of the stakeholders. So all of these three components would always depend on the subordinates, the people who are working for the organization. Secondly, it says that recruiting and hiring employees is costly. And obviously the organizations, they need to focus upon their cost structure and they need to hire the right people, because the wrong hiring would obviously increase your cost of hiring, as well as there would be performance deficiency. Recruiting, as you know, is the process, and selecting, as you know, is the decision. So in our process and decision, we should be keeping in view the legal implications of incompetent hiring. Because if you are going to violate the laws, there can be a case against you in the labor court. So equal employment opportunity laws and court decisions related to non-discriminatory selection procedures, that should be always kept in mind. And the liability of negligent hiring of workers with questionable backgrounds, that is again something which can cause a case against you. So we have to be very much careful that there should not be any type of discrimination. There should not be any type of disparate impact unless and until that particular aspect is taken up as bona fide occupational qualification. Now, how can we avoid negligent hiring claims? There are a few things we need to focus upon. The first thing is carefully scrutinize information supplied by the applicant on his or her employment application. And during that scrutiny, we have to be very much careful that what are the aspects that we are going to sort out. And particularly the aspects like the gender, nationality, religion, these should be taken up as only for information purpose only. Secondly, get the applicant's written authorization for reference checks. That is very important. As you know that we give references in our curriculum vitae or resumes as well. So there should be authorization in the application form for reference checks, and carefully check the references, the people who are referring that particular candidate in our organization. So they should be there to tell us some credibility about the person. Save all records and information you obtain about the applicant. Reject applicants who make false statements of material facts or who have conviction records for offenses directly related and important to the job in question. We have to be very much careful, because there are many people who actually make false statements in their resumes, like they have not gone for that particular degree, or they have never done that particular certificate, and they have somehow generated false certificates of all those credentials. So we have to be very much careful that there can be like people who are cheating us. So Obviously, if there is any false statement or if anything which is not in accordance to our organizational policy and legal aspects, so the applicant should be rejected right away. Balance the applicant's privacy rights with others. And we have to keep in mind that whatever information the applicant is sharing, it should be like kept confidential. And we should always ask that information which is in the category of need to know, that whatever we are going to ask the candidate, so why do we need to know, that person should be telling us about that particular detail. For example, if you are hiring an accountant, why do you think you need to know the height of the person? Right? So we need to be very much careful that whatever we are going to ask, either in test or in interview or in job application or in any particular form we ask the candidate to fill, we have to be very much careful that why we are asking that particular thing. Especially when you discover damaging information about the candidate, anything which damaging, it can be even a disability. So we have to be careful that why on earth we are going to ask for that particular disability. Okay, so make immediate disciplinary action if problems arise. So we have to be careful about that. Like I have just told you, if is height compulsory or not, it all depends upon that why the TDRs would require a particular height of the person. For example, supposedly if in army they ask for the particular height, they ask for the right vision, so these are the things which are required by the army, and the army must have the justifications that why do they need to hire the particular people with particular height, right? Otherwise, for other organizations where height is not taken up as something very much related to the job nature, so we cannot simply ask the height of the person or the vision of the person. These are the things which would be counted against the discriminatory aspects. Now, whenever you're going to conduct any type of test, intelligence test or personality test or aptitude test of the candidates, we have to keep in mind that there are certain basic testing concepts, and these are the things which would be there in all of the HR functionalities all the time. For example, the first thing we need to focus upon is the reliability. Now, what does reliability means? It says the consistency of scores obtained by the same person when retested with the identical or equivalent tests. For example, supposedly that I place a class quiz and you happen to get 8 marks out of 10. Okay, so the reliability would mean that every time that I would conduct that quiz, that similar quiz, so all of you should get, or particularly one of you who has scored 8 marks out of 10 should always score 8 out of 10. Okay, so that is what you call reliability, when you get similar results over a period of time in identical or equivalent tests. Okay, so I repeat the definition again: the consistency of scores obtained by the same person when retested with the identical or equivalent tests, right? The second part of the definition would be that are the test results stable over time or not? That whatever the test results are, either they are low or either they are high. So if they are low, they should always be low. And if they are high, they should be, that those test results should always be high. And mind you, those tests are basically identical or equivalent. So that is what you call reliability. Okay. The second concept we need to focus upon is test validity. The test validity would mean the accuracy with which a test or an interview or so on measures what it purports to measure or fulfills the function it was designed to fill. For example, again, let me quote the example that you are going to hire an accountant. And if you are going to hire an accountant, you should be conducting a test of accountancy, right? Like if you are going to hire an accountant and you conduct a test of marketing, so that would not be valid test. Okay, regardless that what could be its reliability, but it has to be valid as well. So remember, in all the aspects of test designing, we need to focus these two things in our mind, that the tests should be reliable, which means they should be generating similar results, and the test should be valid. Okay. The other part of the test validity, as it says, that does the test actually measures what we need for it to measure. Like I said, if you are going to hire an accountant, you should be testing the accountancy skill rather than you should be testing marketing or HR skills. Okay. So the test should be reliable. The test should be valid. But remember that there is no test ever designed which is 100% reliable and 100% valid at the same time. Okay, what we can do is that we can increase the reliability and try to increase the validity over the period of time. Okay, but it can never reach to the ultimate level of 100% reliability or 100% validity. There would always be some standard deviation. There should always be certain variances occurring when we'll be designing any test. So let me put another example to elaborate this concept of validity and reliability. Supposedly that we are targeting something. If the validity is high and the reliability is high, we are in upper left corner, and that gives us the same results with high validity because we want to target in the middle circle. Now, if the validity is low, but the reliability is high, it means the test results would always be same, but the test is not something which we would be demanding. Okay, so that would be the upper right corner. And in that particular picture, you can see that when we are targeting, so our reliability is high, which means test results are same, but validity is low. That is not something where we wanted to target, because we wanted to target the inner core, the circle, the inner circle. Now, if the validity is high and reliability is low, that is the lower left corner. In the lower left corner, we can see that the test results are not very much similar, but test results are much closer to our targeted value. Okay, so that is the situation when the validity is high and reliability is low. But if both of them are out of context, the validity is low and the reliability is low as well, so we are moving towards the right lower corner. And in that right lower corner, neither the results are having some similarity, nor they are being targeted at something which is desired. Okay, so we have to be always cautious, that we have to keep in mind that whatever instrument we are designing to evaluate the people, either a test or interview or whatsoever, so we have to have the validity and the reliability, both of them present to their maximum value. Now, there are certain types of validity. The first one is known as criterion validity. Criterion validity would mean a type of validity based on showing that scores on the test, right, which is known as predictors. Okay, now the test score would be known as predictors, are related to job performance, which is known as criterion. Now, what does that mean? It means that if the test scores are high, the job performance should always be high. And if the test score is low, the job performance should always be low. Okay, so if that relationship takes place, we would say that there is a correlation, a strong correlation between the predictors and the criterion. Okay, so that context is known as criterion validity. Okay, so we have conducted an accountancy test, and the accountant who is applying for the job has scored very good marks. And if he is scoring very good marks, that is an indication that the person would do good in the job as well. Okay, so read the definition with me again. A type of validity based on showing that scores on the test, which is known as predictors, are related to job performance, which is criterion. Okay, so it's another example could be that our test scores in this class related to students' knowledge of human resource management, right? Supposedly, if you are getting good scores, that would also indicate that you are knowing the course in detail. But if you're not going, if you are not getting good scores, so that would mean that you are not getting to the basic concepts of the course. Okay, but in that assumption as well, remember that we have to keep many other things constant. Okay, and as I told you earlier, the test scores cannot always be in high correlation with the criterion. The next thing is content validity. In content validity, it says a test that is content valid is one that contains a fair sample of the tasks and skills actually needed for the job in question, right? So that means what? Supposedly I have to conduct a quiz of one chapter. So I have to ask all the terminologies and concepts in that chapter in the quiz, right? So that would make my test content valid. Okay, read the definition again. A test that is content valid is one that contains a fair sample of the tasks, right? Which means all the things should be included and skills actually needed for the job in question. So another example could be, do the test questions in this course that relate to human resource management topics or not? So if whatever is being assessed is related to the contents of the course, so that would mean the content validity is high. For example, is taking an HR course the same as doing HR? So whatever you are studying, it should be applicable as well. If the academic knowledge is not practical in its nature, so that would mean the content validity is low. Okay, but again, remember that you can never create 100% criterion validity, and you can never develop 100% content validity. What you can do at most is that you can always try your level best to bring these two things in your validity scenario. Now, how to validate a test? That is an important thing to understand, that whenever you have designed a test, how can you know that your test is properly designed and it is valid and it is reliable and so on? So there are certain steps which you have to follow. The first step is, again, we have to start from job analysis. And as you all know, in job analysis, we develop two basic things: job description and job specification. And when you talk about job description, you'll be focused upon the TDRs, the KRA, KPA, and KPIs. And when you'll be designing the job specification, so you'll be talking about KSAOs. Okay, and then we discussed that we have to hire the qualified person, and the definition for qualification was that TDRs are equal to KSAOs. Okay, so the step one to validate a test, it says that the predictor, which is job specification, KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities, and obviously we can include other personality traits as well, should be in relation with the criterion, which is the quantitative and qualitative measures of job success. So when I use the expression qualitative and quantitative measures of the job success, I'm talking about KRA, KPA, and KPIs. As I told you earlier, that KPIs are always smart. The KPIs should always be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time framed. Okay, so remember that the criterion, which can be qualitative and quantitative in its nature, should be in accordance with the predictor, which is job specification. Step two. Now, once the analysis is being done, the step two is choose the tests. Okay, and when you are planning to choose the tests, there are two aspects you need to keep in mind. One is the test battery, another is a single test. The test battery would mean series of tests, and a single test would mean that it is a standalone test upon which you have to make the decision of either shortlisting the person or hiring the person. Now, either you have designed a series of tests or you have gone for designing a single test. The third step would be administer the test. Okay, so in your test administration, there are two things you need to keep in mind. One is the concurrent validation and the other is predictive validation. When you talk about concurrent validation, it means that the current employees scores with current performance. Okay, you have conducted the test with the current employees, and whatever performance they are showing, that performance should be depicted in the test scores. Okay, which means that the criterion and the predictors are in high correlation. Okay, and that high correlation can either be positively correlated or it can be negatively correlated. Okay, now the second phenomena we need to focus upon is predictive validation. The predictive validation would mean that later measured performance with previous scores, right? For example, the test is being conducted, you have got the score, And then afterwards, after 6 months, after a year, you correlate the score with the performance. So that would be known as predictive validation, because you'll be making the prediction about the future in that particular test score. Okay, so these are the 3 steps for which we need to do a lot of effort to bring our tests to the level of acceptable validity. The 4th step in the same sequence is talking about that relate the test scores and criteria, which is correlation analysis, as I was already telling you, that actual scores on the test with actual performance the person is showing. And as I told you earlier, that 100% validity can never be achieved. So what we have to do, we have to cross-validate and revalidate with the passage of time. So you have to keep on repeating step 3 and step 4 with a different sample of employees, and that would take a lot of time as well. Okay, so every time you'll be doing cross validation or revalidation, sometimes your test score would be more in correlation with your performance, sometimes it would be less in correlation with your performance. So through this hit and try method, we keep on improving our overall scenario. Now, what type of tests can be conducted? There are certain examples I have placed for you in today's session. We are just looking at thematic apperception test. In these type of tests, these are basically psychological tests. In these type of tests, you will be shown a random picture. Okay, and you have to focus on that picture for a few seconds, and then you have to answer the question in association with it. Okay, so this is particularly the sample picture card from thematic apperception test. In this particular picture, we can see there are 2 women. One is younger and another one is older. And after showing you this picture, the question asked is that how do you interpret this picture? Now, all the candidates, all the people would be interpreting this picture in a different way. Okay, someone might be saying that the younger woman is the daughter of the older woman. Someone might be saying that the younger woman is thinking about her future, or the older woman is thinking about her past. So there can be 1 million explanations. Every time different people would be coming up with a different scenario. Okay, and all those scenarios, whatever they'll be interpreting out of the picture, that would be showing a certain psychological aspect of their thinking patterns, and certain psychological aspects about their aptitudes and attitudes. Okay, so let's have some other pictures so that our concept of this thematic apperception test is further clarified. Look at this particular picture. This is again a projective test of TAT. TAT stands for thematic apperception test. For that particular picture, for this particular picture, there is an instruction that just look at this picture briefly for 10 to 15 seconds and write the story it suggests. Okay. Now, if you are looking at this particular picture, and I hope it is visible to you as well, so you can come up with so many interpretations. For example, the person is feeling nostalgic. The person is looking at the snap of his family. The person is missing his family. The person is working on some maps, or person is drawing something, or person is looking out of the window. So there can be so many explanations of what you have just seen. But whatever explanation you are going to come up with, that explanation would be actually showing your bent of mind, would be actually showing your unity of thought, would be actually telling us certain psychological aspects or your thinking patterns in which you particular interpret different phenomena. Okay, let's have another example. Supposedly, this is another picture. The instructions are just look at the picture briefly for 10 to 15 seconds and write the story it suggests. So we can see that there is a teacher-student relationship. We can see the teacher is performing some experiment. We can see that the student is either confused, and we can see the student wanted to ask something, or student is laughing and teacher is concentrating on the experiment. So there can be so many explanations of the same picture. So every person, whenever they will be looking at particular phenomena, so they come up with a certain interpretation of it, and that certain interpretation of certain phenomena would tell us about their thinking pattern and thinking style. Okay, now let's assume that we have to apply the concept of reliability and validity on these pictures. So it would be pretty complicated that how could we have the same responses from the same number of people about the same type of pictures every time. That would be reliability. And how can we come up with the content required validity when it would be talking about certain job hiring or certain job positioning? Okay, so that all makes up things very complicated, but there are certain parameters, there are certain yardsticks through which we can make the things more reliable and more valid, and obviously cannot achieve 100% accuracy. There is another type of test which is usually done in the organizations. Again, these are psychological tests, and now we are looking at Rorschach ink block test. Rorschach ink block tests basically is showing you ambiguous stimuli. Okay, person is asked to report what they see. In previous pictures, for example, this one or this one, we are looking at something which is definite. Okay, so picture is definite. We can definitely say there is a person. We can definitely say there is a lamp. We can definitely say there is a photo frame. Okay, so in these type of pictures, when there is ambiguous stimuli, there is nothing definite, and every person would be interpreting this incomplete picture in their mind out of their own thinking patterns. Okay, so this is again basically going to interpret your thoughts, your personality, your aptitudes, your attitudes, and the psychologist who has designed all these tests would be actually knowing that what was intended to be asked and what actually is being interpreted. So these type of tests are known as Rorschach ink block tests. Now, testing program guidelines, that is the topic we need to know now. The first point in that is that use tests as supplements, okay? Because the test scores can always be greatly affected by so many factors which cannot be are not in our control. For example, if you are conducting this particular test and you wanted to see the complete pictures out of these incomplete ink spots, right, or ink blots for that matter, so the person is having some mental distress. The person faced an accident while coming to the organization for the test. The person is having some socioeconomic pressure or tension. So that psychological phenomena, which would be already going on in his or her mind, would be greatly affecting what he or she is going to interpret about these images. Okay, so we cannot just say that whatever the person has interpreted is the 100% interpretation and now we're going to hire the right person. Okay, the tests can only help us. The tests are taken up as only supplements to find out the right person, but the tests are not the absolute decision criteria or to fix the merit when you hire someone. So that was the reason the testing program guideline says that number one, use tests as supplements. Okay, so much so your score in assignments or your score in your midterm or end term is not the true predictor, or it cannot be the true predictor all the time that how much actually you know about the subject. Okay, so the second point is that we have to keep on increasing the validity of the tests. The third point would be monitor your testing and selection program so that there could be minimum distractions. Then keep accurate records. Use a certified psychologist who is actually the expert to interpret the tests and to design the tests. Manage test conditions and revalidate periodically. You have to keep on reevaluating your test scores and the test patterns and the test contents so that its reliability and validity should be increasing with the passage of time. While you are designing the test and trying to increase its validity and reliability, remember equal employment opportunity aspects of testing. It says an organization must be able to prove that its tests are related to success or failure on the job, which means the tests are valid. Because if the test which is being conducted is not in accordance with the job content, so the test would be claimed in the court. For example, let me repeat my previous example with you. You are going to hire an accountant, and you're going to take the test of swimming. Okay. Now, every time you put the accountant in swimming pool, he would be drowned. Okay. So that would mean the test is highly reliable, because every time the person is not able to swim, the test is reliable. But do you think that the swimming can be the valid predictor for the job nature of an accountant? So that relationship cannot be found easily. Okay. So an organization must be able to prove that its tests are related to success or failure on the job. Secondly, that its tests don't unfairly discriminate against minority or non-minority subgroups, which means disparate impact should not be created. Okay, there should not be any discrimination between the minorities, or not only just minorities. I would say you have to keep in mind all the protected class, the women, the disabled people, the aboriginals, and obviously the minorities. And you have to keep in view that there could not or should not be any deviation from the laws related to any other aspect of discrimination as well. So EEO guidelines and laws apply to all. Okay, selection devices, including interviews, applications, and references, that should always be in accordance to the Equal Employment Opportunity guidelines. The third aspect is that the testing alternatives, if a selection device has disparate impact, we have to see if ever the disparate impact has ever taken place. Disparate impact would mean that in the past there is some discrimination going on which is causing the disparate impact. So what we have to do, institute a different valid selection procedure that does not have an adverse impact. So we'll be changing the questions, we'll be changing the scenarios, we'll be changing the tests, so that if in the past ever it is being reported that that certain discrimination has taken place, so we have to revalidate the procedures and processes, and we might have to change the tests. So obviously you have to show that the test is valid. In other words, that it is a valid predictor of performance on the job. Okay, the criterion and the predictor, these two always be in correlation with each other. And the third thing is that monitor the selection test to see if it has disparate impact. Okay, so in short, equal employment opportunity along with its all scenarios that should always be kept in mind with very much consciousness. The next topic we are about to start is talking about test takers' individual rights and test security. Okay, now test takers have the right, number one, to privacy and information, to the confidentiality of test results, number three, to informed consent regarding use of these results, number four, to expect that only people qualified to interpret the scores will have access to them, and obviously to expect the test is fair to all. Okay, so these are all the things which would bring or which will be addressing to the individual rights and the test security. If you have any question meanwhile, you can always ask the question in the chat room. The next topic we are about to start is going to talk about using tests at work. Okay, so certain research evidences were found which were talking about major types of tests used by employers. And the result shows that the basic skills tests were about 45% of the time. The drug tests for particular jobs were about 47% of the time. The psychological tests overall, when we conducted the research, the psychological tests were about 33% of the time. Okay, so these are the statistical outcomes when we talk about major types of tests used by employers. Use of testing in the context of use of testing, it says that less overall testing now, but more testing is used as specific job skills and job demands increase. Okay, and obviously every test design should be in accordance with the nature of job you're going to have. So screen out bad or dishonest employees. We'll be having certain tests which will be identifying us that who are the bad hire, who could be the bad hires and who are the dishonest people. For example, we'll be having honesty tests, which would be telling us that how much honest would be people on the job. And obviously reduce turnover by personality profiling, so that the right person for the right job at the right time should be hired, and the people should be having some career counseling as well. You know, career counseling is another very important test, and the career counseling should be done to find out that who are the people actually associated with the who are the people who should be actually associated with the jobs. Now, from where we can get the tests, it says that there's different sources of tests, and it can be the test publishers, right? So different types of tests are being developed by different test publishers. That concludes our first session of Zoom. We'll be seeing each other, inshallah, in the second session.